What's up, Pescados? We have a life science lesson today on habitats, communities, and ecosystems. I hear people use the word habitats and ecosystems interchangeably a lot. Though they have something to do with each other, they are not the same thing. I have four pictures of habitats here, but they're also ecosystems. That is where the confusion comes in. Hopefully, by the end of this lesson, you'll be able to explain to me the difference between ecosystems and habitats, and you'll be able to explain to me why people make this confusion. All right, so let's start off with habitats. A habitat is where an organism lives. So you might think of a lion living on a savanna in Africa. You might think of buffalo living on plains in North America, camels in a desert, parrots in a rainforest, things like that. So a habitat is where an organism lives. So we're going to represent habitat with an H for this whole lesson because habitat starts with an H. I see you figured that out. Let's talk about what a population is. A population is all of the same type of organism living in a habitat. Now, a lot of times we hear the word population when we think of what is the population of Dallas? What is the population of Mexico? Things like that. And we're talking about people, which is not wrong by any means. But in those cases, we are talking about human beings. We can have populations of trees. We can have populations of insects. We can have populations of a lot of other things. For example, in North Texas, we could have a population of crows. And we would want to know how many crows live in this habitat. We can also talk about great white sharks in the Pacific Ocean and what is the population of them. Here is an example of a forest habitat and some possible populations. Now, we can't list everything in a forest. There's so many things. But you could have a population of oak trees, great horned owls, raccoons, and carpenter ants. Those would be populations. One of the times we really start thinking about or using the word population is, let's take this example. In a forest, you'll find mice. You'll find mice pretty much anywhere on the planet except really extreme places. Owls eat mice. If something is making the mice sick or dying off, that could put pressure on the owls, and they could either die off or they'd have to go somewhere else because they no longer have a food source. So owls could go bye-bye. It could also put stress on another animal that the owl would eat also, meaning they would have to eat more of that other animal, and then therefore it would stress that animal and it could die off too. So we're getting into food chains and food webs with that, but I just wanted to tell you when we'll use the word population some, and that is one of the times we would use it. When we have all of these living things, we call that a community. Is all the living things in a habitat. Think about your neighborhood. We oftentimes call that a community, and that would be all the people living there. Well, when we talk about our forest, we're talking about all of the things living in that community. So that is where our habitat is a little different than an ecosystem. And now we're going to get into that. What is an ecosystem? An ecosystem is all of the living and non-living things in a place. So you think about that community which makes up your habitat. Well, now in ecosystem, we've added in non-living things. And remember, non-living means things that don't have any needs. Like a rock, it doesn't need water. It doesn't need a certain amount of sunshine. It's a rock. It's not living. When we think about this, and whoa, little mouse is running around here. When we think about living things in our community, which is part of our habitat, and some non-living things, like sun, water, soil, rocks, and air, that equals our ecosystem. And a lot of times people will confuse them and use them wrong. But here's how we might use this correctly. Let's say in our ecosystem, soil gets polluted, or maybe it gets eroded away and no longer can support the life of certain trees. Well, that would mess with or stress out animals that would rely on the trees for shelter or food or things like that. Let's say there's a stream going through our forest and the water gets polluted. Well, it might kill off something like this guy that this guy would need. And therefore, it's stressing out the population and the habitat. So there is a difference between an ecosystem and a habitat. Ecosystem is the whole thing put together. It's a system. Things rely on other things, right? The ants might live underneath the rocks. If the air pollution's bad, birds, their lungs can't handle a lot of pollution. It's not good for any animal, but birds especially, and that could affect owls. You get the idea here of what is the difference between an ecosystem and a habitat. On this last page here, I have just the definitions. A habitat is where an organism lives. Population, all of the same type of organism living in a habitat. Community is all of the living things in a habitat. And an ecosystem is all of the living and non-living things in a place. So that's really all I've got for you. And we will end it here. Uh-oh, what's going on there? Oh, that's right. Adios.